The stench of rotting flesh clung to the air thicker than the morning fog. General Alistair Humphrey, a man whose starched uniform and meticulously groomed moustache seemed almost absurd amidst the carnage, surveyed the field. He'd seen death, of course, commanded it even, but never this. 60 score of England's finest butchered. Horses lay tangled in barbed wire, their screams echoing still in his mind. The air tasted of iron and despair. "Report," he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the grim tableau. Captain Davies, his adjutant, approached, his face pale. "Sir, minimal survivors, they're broken, unresponsive." He swallowed hard, his gaze flicking away from the rows of lifeless eyes, staring blankly at the sky. "German artillery simply tore them apart." Humphrey clenched his jaw. "The reconnaissance?" "Failed, sir. Heavy fog. The guns were masked until too late." "Too late," Humphrey repeated, the words laced with acid. Too late for 60 young men, too late for their families, too late for the glorious charge he had so confidently ordered. He had seen the tactical map. "The valley, the ridge." "It should have worked, sir," Davies said hesitantly. "There's been comment." "Comment?" Humphrey's voice rose dangerously. "Among the men, sir, about the wisdom of the charge." Humphrey turned, his eyes blazing. "Wisdom? This was a strategic necessity. We needed to break through their lines. But cavalry, sir, against machine guns." Davies' voice was barely a whisper. The general noted the fear, the barely concealed accusation in the younger man's eyes. Humphrey ignored him. He strode toward a group of stretcher-bearers, their faces grim masks of exhaustion. The moans of the wounded were a constant, low drone. He saw Sergeant Miller, his face covered in dirt and blood, cradling a dying horse. "Miller," the sergeant looked up, his eyes devoid of hope. "Sir." "What did you see?" Humphrey demanded. Miller spat on the ground. "I saw hell, sir. I saw good men slaughtered for nothing." "It was not for nothing, it was for England," Humphrey thundered. Miller laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "England? Or your bloody glory, sir?" Humphrey slapped him, hard. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Miller didn't flinch. Disrespectful. "Insolence, you will be court-martialed for this." "What's one more death, sir?" Miller muttered, looking back at the horse. Davies stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps—" Humphrey silenced him with a look. He surveyed the field again. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing the full horror of the scene. He knew what they were thinking. They were whispering about the old ways, about aristocratic arrogance, about a general more concerned with his reputation than with the lives of his men. 3 runners, 2 pigeons. 1 radio call had been attempted. All failed to deliver the message in time to call back the doomed charge. He had to salvage something. He had to prove that this sacrifice, this terrible loss, had not been in vain. He had to push forward. He saw the chalk notation scrawled on a nearby ammunition crate. Yuanjun, reinforcements, supposedly on their way. "Davies," he said, his voice regaining its steel, "prepare a report. Emphasize the bravery of the men, the ferocity of the German resistance. We need to paint this as a victory in the making, a necessary sacrifice for the greater good." Davies hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect." "No respect is due, Captain. You will obey my orders. We will not let these men have died for nothing." Humphrey walked away, leaving Davies standing amongst the dead. The weight of 60 lives, of a ruined career, of a nation's disappointment pressed down on him like a physical burden. He looked back at the field, at the bodies of the men he had led to their deaths. He could almost hear their accusing whispers on the wind. He had to make them pay, the Germans. He would make them pay dearly for this day. He would unleash hell upon them. But first, he had a report to write, a report that would twist the truth, that would glorify his actions, that would protect his reputation. A report that would condemn him in his own heart forever. He reached his tent, pulled out his writing implements, and began to pen the lie that would define the rest of his life. The taste of ashes filled his mouth. Chapter 2. The memory of his father's booming laughter, the smell of pipe tobacco, the feel of rough tweed against his cheek, all of it seemed impossibly distant now. He remembered the endless drills on the manicured lawns of his family estate, the endless lectures on duty and honor. He remembered his father, a decorated veteran of the Boer War, telling him that a Humphrey never backed down, never showed weakness. His father would have approved of the charge. He would have called it gallant, heroic, a demonstration of British courage. But his father hadn't seen the machine guns. He sat at his makeshift desk, the flickering lamplight casting long, distorted shadows on the canvas walls of his tent. The report was nearly finished, a masterpiece of carefully constructed lies and half-truths. He had praised the men's bravery, exaggerated the German defences, and downplayed his own role in the disaster. He had even managed to weave in a few phrases about the spirit of the British Empire and the unwavering resolve of the British soldier. He paused, his pen hovering over the page. He needed to add something about the strategic importance of the charge, something to justify the terrible cost. He reread the report, searching for inspiration, but all he could see were the faces of the dead, their eyes accusing him, their silent screams echoing in his ears. He thought of Lieutenant Thompson, a young man barely out of school, who had come to him just before the charge, his face pale but determined. "Sir," he had said, "I'm ready to do my duty." Humphrey had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "That's the spirit, Thompson. Show them what a British officer is made of." Thompson was now lying on the field, his body riddled with bullets, his youthful dreams extinguished forever. Humphrey slammed his fist on the desk. He couldn't do it. He couldn't write another word of this damned lie. He stood up, pacing restlessly in the confined space. He had to tell the truth. He had to confess his mistake. He had to accept the consequences. But what were the consequences? Court-martial, disgrace, the ruin of his career. He could face a firing squad. And what about his family? His wife, Emily, who had always believed in him, who had supported him through every challenge, every hardship. How could he bring such shame upon her? And his son, young Alistair, who looked up to him with such admiration, what kind of example would he be setting? He sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. He was trapped, caught between his conscience and his ambition. He heard a rustling outside his tent. "Who is it?" he called out. The flap of the tent opened and Captain Davies stepped inside. "Sir," he said, his voice low, "I need to talk to you." Humphrey looked up, his eyes wary. "What is it?" Davies hesitated. "I've been thinking about the report, sir. And? I don't think I can sign it, sir. I don't think I can be a part of this." Humphrey stared at him, his mind racing. Was this a test? Had someone sent Davies to trap him? "What are you saying, Captain?" "I'm saying that the truth needs to be told, sir." "The men deserve that much, at least." Humphrey stood up, his face hardening. "Are you questioning my authority, Captain?" "No, sir. I'm questioning your judgment." Humphrey stepped closer to Davies, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are playing a very dangerous game, Captain." Davies stood his ground, his eyes unwavering. "I'm prepared to face the consequences, sir." Humphrey looked at him for a long moment, his mind churning. He could have Davies arrested, court-martialed, even shot. But he knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would only make things worse. He sighed, the fight draining out of him. "What do you suggest, Captain?" "I suggest we tell the truth, sir. We admit our mistakes. We accept the consequences." Humphrey looked at Davies, his young, idealistic face filled with conviction. He saw a reflection of the man he once was, the man he had lost somewhere along the way. He walked to the desk, picked up the report, and tore it in half. Then he tore it again and again, until it was nothing but a pile of shredded paper. "Very well, Captain," he said, his voice heavy. "We will tell the truth." He felt a strange sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew that his life would never be the same, but at least he could face himself in the mirror. "But," he added, his voice hardening again, "we will tell the truth on our terms. We will not let the Germans profit from our mistakes. We will make them pay for what they did here." Davies nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "What do you have in mind, sir?" Humphrey smiled, a cold, hard smile. "I have a plan, Captain. A plan that will make the enemy regret the day they ever crossed us." He spread a new map across the desk. The ridge, the pass. This time he'd adjust the plan to the terrain. That night, under the pale glow of the moon, Humphrey and Davies began to plot their revenge. They would need Yuan Jun. but they knew none were coming. The air tasted of bitter resolve. Chapter 3. Emily's letters were always a balm to his soul. Her elegant handwriting, the scent of lavender that clung to the paper, the gentle words of love and encouragement, they were a reminder of the life he was fighting to protect, the life he longed to return to. But her latest letter was different. There was a note of anxiety in her tone, a subtle undercurrent of worry. She mentioned rumors circulating in London, whispers of a disaster on the Western Front, of heavy losses and questionable leadership. She asked if he was safe, if he was taking care of himself, if he was still the man she had married. He crumpled the letter in his fist, his heart sinking. The truth was already leaking out. The carefully constructed lies he had hoped to maintain were crumbling around him. He had to protect Emily, protect her from the inevitable fallout. He couldn't let her be tainted by his disgrace. He sat down and began to write a reply, carefully choosing his words, trying to reassure her without revealing the full extent of the disaster. He told her that he was safe, that he was doing his duty, that he loved her more than anything in the world. He avoided any mention of the charge, any reference to the heavy losses. He finished the letter, sealed it, and handed it to a messenger. He watched as the messenger rode away, his heart heavy with guilt and apprehension. He knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. He knew that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. He turned his attention back to the map, to the plan he and Davies had devised. It was a risky plan, a desperate gamble, but it was the only way he could see to salvage something from the wreckage. The plan involved a daring raid on a German supply depot, a key strategic location that was heavily defended. They would need to infiltrate the depot, sabotage the supplies, and escape undetected. It was a long shot, but if they could pull it off, it would not only disrupt the German war effort, but also restore some of the morale that had been lost. He knew that many of the men were still shaken by the disastrous charge. They were demoralized, disillusioned, questioning their leadership. He had to show them that he was still capable of leading them, that he was still worthy of their trust. He called a meeting of his officers and laid out the plan. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, the doubt in their faces. But he spoke with conviction, with passion, with the force of his personality. He told them that this was their chance to redeem themselves, to avenge their fallen comrades, to prove that they were still the best soldiers in the world. Slowly, hesitantly, they began to come around. They saw the determination in his eyes, the fire in his voice. They began to believe that it might be possible, that they might actually have a chance. He assigned the tasks, delegated the responsibilities, and oversaw the preparations. He worked tirelessly, pushing himself to the limit, determined to make this plan a success. He knew that his reputation was on the line, that his career was hanging by a thread. But more than that, he knew that the lives of his men were in his hands. He couldn't afford to fail them again. As the day of the raid approached, the tension in the camp grew thicker. The men were nervous, anxious, but also excited, determined. They were ready to prove themselves, to show the world that they were not broken, that they were not defeated. On the eve of the raid, Humphrey gathered the men together. He stood before them, his face etched with determination. "Men," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "tomorrow we embark on a dangerous mission. We will face great risks. We will encounter fierce resistance. But we will not falter. We will not yield. We will fight with courage, with honor, with the spirit of the British Empire in our hearts." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the men. "We will avenge our fallen comrades. We will show the Germans that they cannot break us. We will return victorious." The men roared their approval, their voices filled with renewed confidence and determination. They were ready. Humphrey smiled, a genuine smile this time. He felt a surge of pride, a sense of connection with these men. He knew that they were relying on him, that they were looking to him for leadership. He wouldn't let them down. He looked up at the sky, at the stars twinkling in the darkness. He thought of Emily, of his son. He whispered a silent prayer, asking for their safety, for his own strength. He was ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Later that night, a carrier pigeon arrived, bearing a coded message. "Genkin." It was a false hope, he knew, but he allowed himself a moment of fleeting optimism. The night tasted of impending battle. Chapter 4. The raid began under the cloak of darkness. A small contingent of soldiers, led by Humphrey and Davies, silently slipped through the German lines, navigating the treacherous terrain with practiced ease. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat. Every sound seemed to amplify the danger. They reached the perimeter of the supply depot, a heavily fortified compound surrounded by barbed wire, machine gun nests and watchtowers. The depot was a hive of activity, with trucks constantly arriving and departing, soldiers patrolling the grounds, and spotlights scanning the darkness. Humphrey and Davies huddled together, studying the layout of the depot, identifying the weak points in the defenses. They had obtained detailed intelligence on the depot's security measures, but they knew that the Germans would be vigilant, expecting an attack. "We go in here," Davies said, pointing to a section of the perimeter fence that was partially obscured by a dense thicket of bushes. "It's the least guarded area," Humphrey nodded. "Agreed. We'll split into 2 teams. One team will create a diversion, drawing the enemy's attention away from the main objective. The other team will infiltrate the depot and sabotage the supplies." He assigned Davies to lead the diversionary team, tasking him with attacking a nearby guard post, creating a loud and visible distraction. Humphrey would lead the infiltration team, tasked with planting explosives on the main supply dumps. "Remember," Humphrey said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to be quick, quiet, and efficient. We can't afford to get caught. The fate of the mission depends on it." The 2 teams separated, moving into position. Davies and his team crept towards the guard post, their hearts pounding in their chests. Humphrey and his team edged along the perimeter fence, their eyes scanning the darkness, their senses on high alert. Davies gave the signal, and his team launched their attack. They stormed the guard post, firing their weapons, shouting battle cries, creating a chaotic and confusing scene. The Germans responded quickly, pouring out of the depot, rushing to defend the guard post. The sound of gunfire filled the air, the sky lit up by the flashes of explosions. While the Germans were distracted by the attack on the guard post, Humphrey and his team slipped through the gap in the perimeter fence, infiltrating the depot. They moved quickly and silently through the shadows, avoiding the patrols, navigating the maze of warehouses and storage containers. They reached the main supply dumps, a vast expanse of crates piled high with ammunition, fuel and food. Humphrey and his team set to work, planting explosives on the crates, rigging them to detonate in a series of timed explosions. They worked with precision and efficiency, their movements coordinated and synchronized. As they were finishing up, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps. A group of German soldiers was heading their way. "Quickly," Humphrey whispered. "Hide!" The team scattered, concealing themselves behind the crates, holding their breath, praying that they wouldn't be discovered. The German soldiers walked past, their voices loud and boisterous. They were laughing and joking, oblivious to the danger that lurked nearby. Once the soldiers were gone, Humphrey and his team emerged from their hiding places, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had narrowly avoided disaster. They finished planting the explosives, set the timers, and prepared to escape. But as they turned to leave, they saw a figure standing in their path. It was a German officer, his face grim, his eyes filled with suspicion. He had seen them. "Halt!" he shouted, raising his pistol. "Who are you?" Humphrey knew that they had been discovered, that their mission was on the verge of collapse. He had to act quickly. He drew his own pistol and fired. The officer fell to the ground, dead. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the depot, alerting the other German soldiers. The alarm was raised, sirens blared, and the entire depot erupted in chaos. Humphrey and his team were trapped. He yelled, "Run!" Now, the taste of lead filled the air. Chapter 5 Chaos erupted. The air filled with the roar of gunfire, the screams of the wounded, and the frantic shouts of German soldiers. Humphrey and his team were caught in a deadly crossfire, pinned down by a relentless barrage of bullets. He ducked behind a stack of crates, bullets whizzing past his head. He could feel the heat of the explosions as the charges they had planted began to detonate, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. "We need to get out of here," he yelled to his men, his voice barely audible above the din. "Follow me!" He scrambled to his feet and charged forward, firing his pistol as he ran, trying to clear a path through the enemy ranks. His men followed close behind, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They fought their way through the depot, battling hand to hand with the German soldiers. Dodging bullets and leaping over obstacles, they suffered heavy casualties, men falling left and right, their bodies riddled with bullets. Humphrey pushed forward, driven by a fierce determination to survive, to lead his men to safety. He knew that their chances of escape were slim, but he refused to give up hope. They reached the perimeter fence, the same section they had used to infiltrate the depot. But the fence was now heavily guarded, with machine gun nests and barbed wire blocking their path. "We're trapped," one of his men shouted, his voice filled with despair. "Not yet," Humphrey roared. "We'll find a way." He spotted a nearby truck, its engine still running, its driver slumped over the wheel, dead. An idea sparked in his mind. "Get in the truck," he yelled. "We're going to crash through the fence." The men scrambled into the truck, Humphrey jumping behind the wheel. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the truck roaring to life, its wheels spinning wildly. He steered the truck towards the fence, bracing himself for impact. The truck smashed into the fence, the barbed wire tearing through the metal, the impact throwing the men around inside. The fence gave way, and the truck burst through, careening out of control. Heading towards the open road, the German soldiers opened fire, bullets slamming into the truck, shattering the windows, and tearing through the metal. Men screamed as they were hit, their bodies falling limp. Humphrey fought to maintain control of the truck, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, his eyes focused on the road ahead. He knew that they were still in danger, that the Germans would be in pursuit, but he refused to slow down. He drove the truck as fast as he could, weaving through the darkness, trying to evade the pursuing Germans. He drove for miles, his body aching, his mind exhausted, but he refused to stop. Finally, as dawn began to break, he reached a safe location, a hidden valley where they could rest and regroup. He pulled the truck to a stop, and the men stumbled out, their bodies battered and bruised, their faces pale and drawn. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. He surveyed the scene, his heart heavy with grief. Many of his men were dead, their bodies lying scattered in the back of the truck. The survivors were wounded, exhausted and traumatized. They had completed their mission. They had sabotaged the German supply depot, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the loss of so many lives. He looked at Davies, his face etched with concern. "How many did we lose?" he asked. Davies shook his head, his voice choked with emotion. "Too many, sir. Too many." Humphrey closed his eyes, his mind filled with the images of the dead. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had led these men into danger. He had asked them to risk their lives, and many of them had paid the ultimate price. He knew that he would never forget this day, that the memory of this raid would haunt him forever. He opened his eyes, his face hardening with determination. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. He had to focus on the future, on the task ahead. They still had a war to win. As they started to care for the wounded, a runner approached, breathless. "Sir, urgent message. Wenjun diverted. Enemy counter-offensive imminent." The air tasted of defeat. Chapter 6. The news of the diverted reinforcements hit them like a physical blow. Their hopes for relief, for a respite from the relentless pressure of the German offensive, were dashed. They were on their own, outnumbered and outgunned, facing an enemy determined to crush them. Humphrey gathered his remaining officers, his face grim. "We need to assess our situation," he said. "What are our resources? What are our options?" Davies reported that they had limited ammunition, dwindling supplies and a handful of wounded men who needed immediate medical attention. Their position was exposed, vulnerable to attack from any direction. "We can't stay here," Davies said. "We need to find a more defensible location," Humphrey agreed. They needed to find a place where they could hold out against the German advance, a place where they could regroup and prepare for a counterattack. He studied the tactical map, searching for a suitable location. He spotted a nearby village nestled in a valley, surrounded by hills and forests. The village was strategically located, offering natural defenses and potential escape routes. "We'll make for the village," he said. "It's our best chance for survival." The men began to prepare for the move, gathering their remaining supplies, helping the wounded onto makeshift stretchers, and checking their weapons. They moved quickly and efficiently, their movements coordinated and synchronized. As they prepared to leave, a scout rushed into the valley, his face pale with fear. "Sir," he exclaimed, "the Germans are coming! They're advancing on our position." Humphrey's face hardened. They were out of time. They had to move now before the Germans surrounded them. "Let's go," he yelled. "Move out! Move out!" The men scrambled to their feet and began to move. Their pace hurried, their eyes scanning the horizon. They marched through the valley, their footsteps echoing in the silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they neared the village, they saw the Germans approaching, their numbers overwhelming, their weapons poised. The battle was about to begin. Humphrey quickly deployed his men, positioning them in strategic locations around the village, utilizing the natural defenses to their advantage. He placed machine gun nests on the high ground, positioned snipers in the trees, and set up barricades in the streets. He knew that they were outnumbered, that their chances of holding the village were slim, but he was determined to fight to the last man. He wouldn't let the Germans take the village without a fight. The Germans launched their attack, pouring into the village, their weapons blazing. The battle raged, the sound of gunfire filling the air, the screams of the wounded echoing in the streets. The British soldiers fought with courage and determination, repelling the German assaults, inflicting heavy casualties on the enemy. They fought for their lives, for their comrades, for their country. Humphrey moved through the village, encouraging his men, directing their fire, and coordinating their defenses. He was a whirlwind of energy, his presence inspiring his men, bolstering their morale. He saw Lieutenant Thompson, the young officer who had expressed his readiness to do his duty, lying wounded in the street. He rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Thompson," he said, his voice filled with concern, "are you all right?" Thompson looked up at him, his face pale and drawn. "I'm hit, sir," he said weakly. "I don't think I'm going to make it." Humphrey grasped his hand, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Don't talk like that, Thompson," he said. "You're a brave soldier. You'll pull through." Thompson smiled weakly. "Thank you, sir," he said. "It's been an honor serving under you." He coughed, blood trickling from his lips. "Tell my mother I did my best." He closed his eyes and died. Humphrey closed his eyes, his heart heavy with grief. He had seen too much death, too much suffering. He was tired of the war, tired of the violence, tired of the loss. He opened his eyes, his face hardening with determination. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. He had to focus on the present, on the battle that raged around him. He stood up, drew his pistol, and charged back into the fray, his voice ringing with defiance. The fight tasted of desperation. Chapter 7. The battle for the village raged for hours, a brutal and bloody struggle with no clear victor. The British soldiers, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity born of desperation, repelling wave after wave of German assaults. Humphrey, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and grief, fought like a man possessed, leading the charge, inspiring his men, and taking down German soldiers with ruthless efficiency. He moved through the village, a whirlwind of destruction, his pistol blazing, his voice roaring, his presence a beacon of defiance amidst the chaos. But the Germans were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless, their determination unwavering. They pressed their attack, slowly but surely pushing the British soldiers back, tightening their grip on the village. As the day wore on, the British defenses began to crumble. The machine gun nests were silenced, the snipers were picked off, and the barricades were breached. The Germans poured into the village, engaging the British soldiers in fierce hand-to-hand combat. Humphrey saw his men falling around him, their bodies riddled with bullets, their faces contorted in pain. He watched as the village, once a peaceful and idyllic place, was transformed into a scene of carnage and destruction. He knew that they couldn't hold out much longer, that their position was untenable. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of ammunition. Their end was near. He gathered his remaining officers, his face grim. "We need to make a decision," he said. "We can't stay here and fight to the death. We need to find a way to escape." Davies suggested a daring plan. They would launch a surprise counterattack, breaking through the German lines and making a run for the nearby forest. It was a risky plan, but it was their only chance for survival. Humphrey agreed. They had nothing to lose. He gathered his remaining men, his voice filled with determination. "Men," he said, "we're going to make a break for it. We're going to launch a surprise attack, break through the German lines and make a run for the forest. It's going to be dangerous, but it's our only chance. Are you with me?" The men roared their approval, their voices filled with defiance. They were ready to fight, to risk everything for a chance at survival. Humphrey gave the signal and the men charged forward, their weapons blazing, their voices roaring. They surprised the Germans, catching them off guard and momentarily disrupting their attack. The British soldiers fought with a renewed ferocity, pushing back the German lines, creating a gap in their defenses. They charged through the gap, heading towards the forest, their hearts pounding in their chests. But the Germans quickly recovered, regrouping their forces and launching a counterattack. They pursued the British soldiers, firing their weapons, inflicting heavy casualties. Humphrey led the charge, his pistol blazing, his voice roaring, his presence inspiring his men. He fought like a man possessed, taking down German soldiers left and right, clearing a path for his men to escape. As they neared the forest, Humphrey was hit. A bullet slammed into his shoulder, sending a searing pain through his body. He stumbled, falling to the ground. He looked up, his vision blurring, his body weakening. He saw the forest so close yet so far away. He saw his men running towards it, their faces filled with hope. He knew that he couldn't go on. He was too weak, too wounded. He had to stay behind to buy his men time to escape. He yelled to Davies, his voice barely audible. "Go on, save yourselves." Davies hesitated, his face filled with concern. "But sir, go," Humphrey roared. "That's an order!" Davies nodded, his eyes filled with respect. He turned and ran, disappearing into the forest. Humphrey was alone. He pulled himself to his feet, his body racked with pain. He drew his pistol, his hand trembling, his eyes filled with defiance. He turned to face the approaching Germans, his voice ringing with a final act of defiance. He would sell his life dearly. He would deny them any satisfaction. The air tasted of oncoming death. He raised his pistol and fired. Chapter 8. The world dissolved into a haze of pain and confusion. Humphrey felt himself falling, tumbling into a dark abyss. He heard the sound of gunfire, the screams of the wounded. But they seemed distant, muffled, unreal. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind filled with fragmented memories, images of his past, faces of the dead. He saw his father stern and proud, lecturing him on duty and honor. He saw Emily, her eyes filled with love, her voice whispering words of encouragement. He saw Lieutenant Thompson, young and eager, expressing his readiness to do his duty. He felt a profound sense of regret, a deep and abiding sadness. He had failed them all. He had failed his father by tarnishing the family name. He had failed Emily by leaving her alone and heartbroken. He had failed Thompson by leading him to his death. He had failed his men by leading them into a disastrous charge, by leading them into a hopeless battle. He had led them to their deaths, and he had nothing to show for it. He felt a surge of anger, a fierce and bitter rage. He was angry at the Germans for their brutality, for their aggression. He was angry at the politicians for their incompetence, for their warmongering. He was angry at himself for his pride, for his ambition, for his blindness. He wanted to scream, to shout, to unleash his rage upon the world. But he was too weak, too exhausted. He could only lie there, helpless and alone, waiting for death to claim him. But then something unexpected happened. He felt a hand on his shoulder, a gentle touch, a soothing presence. He heard a voice, soft and kind, whispering in his ear. "It's all right," the voice said. "You're safe now." He opened his eyes, his vision still blurred, his mind still clouded. He saw a figure standing over him, a woman, her face obscured by shadows. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman smiled, her face becoming clearer, her features more defined. He recognized her. It was Emily. "I'm here," she said. "I'm here to take care of you." He stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. How was she here? What was she doing in this war-torn village? What are you doing here?" he stammered. "I came to find you," she said. "I knew you were in trouble. I couldn't stay away." He felt a wave of emotion wash over him, a mixture of joy, relief, and disbelief. She was here, she was safe, she was with him. "But how?" he asked. "How did you get here?" I have friends, she said. People who helped me. People who believe in you. She knelt beside him, taking his hand in hers. Her touch was warm, comforting, reassuring. You're going to be all right, she said. I promise. We're going to get you out of here. We're going to take you home. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of hope, a sense of redemption. He was not alone. He was loved. He was forgiven. He drifted off to sleep, his mind filled with images of Emily, of their home, of a future filled with love and happiness. When he awoke, he was in a different place. He was lying in a bed in a small, dimly lit room. He looked around, his mind still foggy, his body still aching. He saw Emily sitting beside him, her face filled with concern. Where am I? He asked. You're in a safe place, she said. You're with friends. He looked around again, noticing the faces of the other people in the room. They were unfamiliar, but they seemed kind, trustworthy. Who are these people? He asked. They're part of the resistance, she said. They're helping us. He stared at her, his mind racing. The resistance? What was going on? What's happening? He asked. Emily took a deep breath, her face becoming serious.